Julia Fisher. Welcome to The Olive Tree, the programme that brings you stories of both Jewish and Palestinian believers living in Israel and the West Bank. It's well known that Israeli Jews come from many different backgrounds. One of the largest groups to emigrate to Israel have come from the former Soviet Union, and my guest today is one such person. Originally from St Petersburg, Marianna came to Israel almost 15 years ago. Her father is a poet and writer. Her mother a theatre director. The family is Jewish but not religious, so Marianna grew up in a communist country in a secular environment. At the age of 18, something happened to Marianna, and she started to believe that God exists. When we met recently in Netanya, a town in Israel, she told me what happened.
Actually, in two stages. Stage one was divine intervention, and I had some emotional issues, and I felt really scared and panicky, and basically a series of anxiety attacks. And I thought that if I will take one of the magic spiritual books, and I will just read a little bit from it, everything is going to become better. So one of those books was the Bible. We had it in our library in the family, in the mythology section. So I pulled it out and got very, very scared. Because all of a sudden, in 1 second, I realized that God exists, that He's almighty, that He is the King, and I am not doing what He wants me to do. So I had this burning in me to reconcile with God urgently. The next day I went to a synagogue, like every good Jewish girl should. And I had a conversation with a rabbi, that was most enlightening. And during the conversation, he said that God is a fascinating concept. And that basically pushed me away because I didn't feel any need for concepts in my life. Concepts were intact. So the next day I went to Russian Orthodox Church, because that's where the two spiritual options that I had in mind at that time. And in the Russian Orthodox Church, I told them that I would like to become a nun, because I thought that God is never angry with nuns, so that would be like a shortcut to be on good terms with Him. And they basically let me be part of the program that they have, which is a very long program, very involved. You have to wake up very early, very often. And I've done it for 3 months until a friend of mine invited me to a conference. She said, I think, Marianna, I found similar way to what you're trying to do, but just easier. And I said, oh, yeah, I like easier. Thank you very much. So I went to a Campus Crusade conference in Moscow. And there it was just an amazing experience with 4,000 people from all over former Soviet Union, young people worshiping God together. And I was just overwhelmed. And I think that's what pushed me into the kingdom, this sense of the body. It's just family. That was very big for me. And since then, I've been serving the Lord.
Did you know any other Jewish believers at that time?
No, more than that. On the first stages, when I went to the first Bible study group, I spoke there with someone and they told me that I'm not Jewish anymore and I'm not Orthodox anymore, of course. I'm just a Christian, perfectly generic Christian. And I was very relieved because the Jewish identity in Russia is kind of a bothersome thing. You don't really want to hold on to it very much. So I thought, oh, that's easy. And I lived as not Jewish for the first 3 years of my faith. And then I met a Messianic believer, a leader, who came to pastor a Messianic congregation in St Petersburg. I met him quite miraculously. And when I introduced myself to him, he asked me if I was Jewish, and I said, no, I'm not, but my parents are. And then 2 years later, I was in Israel.
So what brought you to Israel, Marianna?
God. I never thought of leaving Russia. But all of a sudden, I just had this sense in me that He's calling me to Israel. And the first time I realized that this is what's happening, I said no. And I said, it's very loud, very noisy, very hot, and a lot of spiritual warfare. I'm not going. And for 6 months, I've resisted. And he would keep talking to me, and I would say, no. I love it here. I'm not going anywhere. And after 6 months, it just something in my heart broke, and I've surrendered and moved. And now I know this is the best way for my life. But it took me a couple of years of struggle to get there.
Because tell me what you were doing in Russia. You had a very interesting job.
In Russia, I had a series of very interesting jobs. My very first job was an assistant at a movie studio when I was 15. I studied in the university to be a film critic and a director. And when I became a believer, almost immediately I got employed by the Bible Society for 3 years, and then some other ministry jobs. So before I left Russia, I had a ministry equipping youth leaders. That was my thing, and I thought, I will do it forever. It was going very well.
You gave all that up, you left your family, you came to Israel on your own. What happened?
I was praying about where to go. And I had 2 contacts in the land. One was with Evan Thomas, and one was with Eitan Shishkov. And we were communicating by email. And then I received a phone call from a friend from high school who immigrated to Israel almost immediately after graduation, and I haven't seen her all these years. She's not a believer, and she said, I just had this feeling that I need to find you. So she said, I was looking for you. I'm visiting St Petersburg now. I want to meet with you. And I said, okay. So we got together, and I told her that I'm thinking about moving. Without even asking me, she called her parents who lived in Netanya, and she asked them if I could stay with them until I find any other accommodation. So I received an invitation from her parents from Netanya to come and live with them for free for as long as I need. And that basically was a determining factor. And I came to Netanya, and I lived here for 10 years.
To bring the story up to date, you're now working with single mothers and their children. So how did you move from film into this area of social work, really?
That I can't even explain. I know. It's funny. People ask me what's my profession and what do I do in life, and I say these 2 things are not connected. I was trained to do one thing. I'm doing very different thing. And a couple of times I was asking God if maybe I should go back to university, become a social worker or something. But He seems to be doing just fine with who I am at the moment. When I was still working in Netanya in the congregation as an administrator, we had many different projects that I was running and taking care of. During that time, one of the things that we were doing was we had a little intercession group. And at one of the times at the meeting, the Lord started speaking to me about widows and orphans. So I carried it in my heart in prayer for over a year. There was a bit of a project that I had in my heart that I presented to the leadership in the congregation, and we started a program for the single-parent families here in Netanya. But that was only one of 10 million things that I was involved in. And then in 2006, the Lord spoke to me very clearly about moving to the desert. He opened up my heart for the desert. I just absolutely fell in love. I never had an experience like that before. And I knew that this is a very clear call and that I need to move. I had friends living there as a community. So that was already set up for me that I could join them. And I've been asking the Lord, what am I supposed to do? And how am I supposed to survive? Okay, you're telling me to leave my job, leave my friends, my support system once again, move across the country. What am I supposed to do? And He was very clear in telling me that I need to move first, and then He's going to tell me. So I said, okay, I'm going to do that. I moved to the Negev for about maybe 6 or 7 months. I just prayed. I was waiting because He told me that He's going to tell me. So I didn't want to start things from myself. Although when I was moving, I had an idea of what I'm supposed to do, a very different idea, working with women, and I still believe that it will happen, but it's obviously not the season. So I was just sitting on this vision, waiting to see what happens. And then I was just approached by a couple of pastors, local pastors, who knew that we had a single-parent program in Netanya, and they called me and they asked me to see if there is any way I can help single moms in their congregation. And then I got connected with another person with a similar vision, and we started working together, and it just slowly, this work developed.
I just want to ask you, before you tell me more, how big a problem this is in Israel?
I think it's a pretty major problem all over the world. because we all know the statistics for divorce, which is about 50% of marriages fall apart. And I believe that single moms are the modern day's widows, because our life expectancy became much longer. We don't die early. Our men don't die when they're 30. But our ability to stay faithful and committed became smaller and smaller. I believe it's a very big issue everywhere in the world. And because we don't see them as widows and orphans, very often we don't feel moved to help and support and encourage. In the congregations, Messianic congregations, I think mainly from former Soviet Union, we have large number of single-parent families. And another question that people very often ask me, they say, so what, the state is not doing anything? And the state is doing things. Unfortunately, in Israel, war takes priority over social needs. So the help that they receive from the state is not enough. For example, a mother of 4 would receive about $800 a month in Social Security, which, if she won't have other sources of income, that will make the whole family starve.
Marianna, originally from St Petersburg, now living in Israel. And you're listening to The Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher. It may have surprised you to hear that there is such poverty in Israel. But as Marianna said, the cost of living is high and wages are often low, especially for unskilled workers. Her work amongst single-parent families and children is increasing in the Negev, and maybe you'd like to help. Well, the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a charity based in the UK that supports people like Marianna, who are working amongst both Jews and Arabs. So if you would like to send a donation or receive our free bi-monthly newsletter, please either visit our website, www.olivetreefund.org, where you will also find information, articles and news about our tours, or write to me, Julia Fisher, at the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund, P.O. Box 850, Horsham, RH12 9GA in the UK. Meanwhile, I'll be back at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.